Hearing on the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry on realizing the conservation benefits of precision agriculture will come to order. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to the Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee's hearing on realizing the conservation benefits of precision agriculture. I'd like to thank Ranking Member LaMalfa for his engagement on this issue, as well as each subcommittee member for taking part in the hearing today. I'd like to welcome one of my constituents, Mr. Dustin Madison from Louisa County, Virginia. Dustin, I'm glad that we have your expertise from farming your own land and serving many other farmers informing our discussion today. Your knowledge from being a technical service provider for NRCS, a certified Virginia resource management planner, and a certified crop advisor will be especially useful. It was a real pleasure to visit Louisa County as part of my two-day farm tour in August, and it's great to have you here today. I'd also like to welcome our other witnesses, Mr. Don Cameron and Dr. Heather Carson. Thank you for traveling to Washington, D.C. to share your insight. As technology within the agriculture industry continues to make leaps and bounds, we're seeing farmers grow more food while more judiciously using inputs such as water and fertilizer. Precision agriculture offers producers opportunities to farm more efficiently and more sustainably. Farmers know that growing conditions can vary significantly, even within the same field, and these factors range from soil type and chemistry to fertility and productivity to the amount of water in the ground. Precision agriculture makes it possible to calculate how these differences translate into different levels of inputs, so that each part of the field is getting only as much as it needs. This means that farmers are saving time, fuel, and money while increasing their output. It's more efficient and it yields better crops. Precision technology has applications for animal agriculture as well. It is now possible to monitor the feed production, herd health, and energy use on farms to improve efficiency, productivity, and the quality of animal care. And central to our hearing today, precision agriculture enables farmers to enhance production and lower their costs, while at the same time delivering environmental benefits. Site-specific crop management translates into less soil erosion and nutrient runoff. It also improves soil health and water quality, while also providing insight into producers' environmental footprint and creating opportunities for them to adopt practices that enhance both yields and conservation. Today, I'm eager to discuss how farmers are using precision agriculture technologies, what successes they are experiencing, and what barriers are impairing their ability to implement precision ag. And how does this impact their productivity, their competitiveness in the United States and global markets, and their environmental footprint? It's also my hope that today's hearing can serve as a launchpad for us to discuss ways we here in the House of Representatives can help more farmers adopt these tools. And with that, I would like to recognize the ranking member, the distinguished gentleman from California, Congressman Doug LaMalfa, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman Spanberger, for holding today's hearing and the way we conduct this committee. I really appreciate it. Here, of course, as she mentioned, to examine the benefits of precision agriculture on conservation, which is indeed one of the many tools we have at our disposal to help improve conservation practices on farms and ranches. Indeed, rapid advance in technology over the last several years, I'd say several decades, has made precision agriculture more important because of the benefits it'll provide. Going back to the Dust Bowl era is really when we started learning the importance of this in this country. And the ASCS was formed, Ag Stabilization and Conservation Service. So you hear those words in there, stabilization and conservation. Very important, as well, the lessons we learned from the Dust Bowl era and since. Precision agriculture has increased productivity, and in my own experience growing rice with our fewer inputs required in our land, water savings, less fertilizer, less pesticides needed. I've spent a lot of hours myself on a tractor with a laser-guided leveler, making our fields flat and almost perfect, to within 1/8 of an inch, theoretically, on the soil there, in order to use less water and keep those weeds from getting away from us, therefore being able to use less pesticides to control that pesky water grass. So it's really been important to see that laser technology now morph into GPS, which is even more precise. It actually will take into account the curvature of the earth. You want level water, you're going to get level water that way in rice. But in so many other ways, these inputs have been helpful in so many aspects of agriculture to bring that precision and be able to make our inputs go farther and using the things we don't want to have to use much less. So when we talk about the overlap, again, if you're able to run your disk, your implement on a much narrower gap and not waste time doing the same acres over and over again, it's better for the soil. And it's even easier on the operator to not have to be so on target the whole time, every pass all day, that it's better on the employees. So in a challenging period, when farmers face these price pressures for production, price pressures for increased costs of inputs, precision agriculture really helps give you an edge in order to stay profitable and competitive. So many benefits we'll talk about this afternoon, but we have a chance to hear from people firsthand about this technology. In the 2018 Farm Bill, we also included several provisions to extend broadband so we can bring more broadband to Americans in the most rural areas of the nation. It's important in being able to help utilize this technology and the data that's gathered when we're out there tracking yields. For example, on my rice combine, you're able to map out what the yields are doing in a field, and that helps you decide how you want to treat that field the next year with how much fertilizer or other issues you could be tracking as you go. And so broadband is important for a lot of different aspects of agriculture. We have more and more of that so we can transfer this data and use it and take the most advantage of it. So Farm Bill had EQIP that was able to help with these conservation practices in this precision that we need. And so I could go on and on about this, but I'm a true believer because we've used it ourselves, and I've seen so many of my neighbors benefit from being able to further track your yields, fertilizer inputs, and all those things that make this technology more and more important as we go forward. I saw some very impressive technology down in Mr. Panetta's district here on a recent tour that will be very exciting to see that come forward in the future as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to our chairman, and I appreciate the time here today.
Thank you. In consultation with the ranking member and pursuant to Rule 11E, I want to make other members of the subcommittee aware that members of the full committee may join us today, and I thank the ranking member of the full committee for joining us here today. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure there's ample time for questions today. I'd like to welcome our witnesses. Thank you very much for being here today. It is my pleasure and my privilege to welcome Mr. Dustin Madison from Louisa County, Virginia, a constituent of Virginia's 7th Congressional District. Mr. Madison, it is great to have you join us here today. Mr. Madison grew up on his family's crop and cattle farm in Louisa and now operates 100 acres of his own farmland. He also manages agronomy and conservation initiatives on Engel Family Farms, which raises corn, soybeans, wheat, and other crops on 20,000 acres across the Commonwealth. Mr. Madison is a graduate of Virginia Tech. Our next witness is Dr. Heather Carson, Associate Professor within the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences at Pennsylvania State University. Dr. Carson teaches and conducts research and extension education in agronomy and agroecology. Her interdisciplinary cropping systems research seeks to develop systems to sustain long-term farm productivity and profitability while reducing environmental impacts. And for our final witness, I will yield to my colleague from California for the introduction.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. As we know, many ranchers and farmers in California have adopted much of this technology, as a lot of it evolves in California. And so I'm pleased to be able to have one of those producers here today. Mr. Don Cameron, since 1981, has been the Vice President and General Manager of Terra Nova Ranch in Helton, California, where they currently grow over 25 different crops. 25. Sometimes it's plenty to do one where I'm from. But in addition to his work at Terra Nova Ranch, Mr. Cameron owns Prado Farms in Fresno County, California. It's an honor to have you here today, representing California, along with some of your delegation here. We have a great panel of witnesses in front of us today, and I'm glad to have them travel here all the way to D.C. to spend time with us and help educate all of us, our staffs, and those that are going to see this testimony on TV. So thank you once again, Chair Spanberger, and I yield back.
We will now proceed to hearing from our witnesses. Each of you will have 5 minutes to present testimony. When the light turns yellow, that indicates there's 1 minute left to complete your testimony. Mr. Madison, may you please begin when you are ready?
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Spanberger, Ranking Member Lamalfa, and members of the subcommittee. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here today and talk about this topic that is pretty near and dear to me, as it's part of my everyday life. Precision and conservation and agriculture really go hand in hand, and it's something that I touch pretty much from sun up to sundown. I think my time here is best spent telling you that conservation and precision agriculture are really, really big topics, and we could go a long time and not really scratch the surface. So I'm going to shorten that as much as I can and start with a little background on conservation. Even in the 90s, here in Virginia, conservation and agriculture were not even in the same conversation. They were two different things. We farmed, and then you recycled or clipped the little plastic rings around a six-pack so that you didn't hurt the birds and the fish. Two different worlds. Well, eventually, we figured out that wasn't a great idea. I could plow a field, and it could rain the next day. All my dirt, all my topsoil, all my nutrients would go down a hill into the creek, ending up somewhere in the Chesapeake Bay. If you fast forward to today, we do a lot better. No-till, cover crops, things like that are big conservation words, but they're a big part of our lives. That is a really big change. I don't think I can overstate that enough. Let's switch over to precision ag. In the 90s, it really wasn't a thing either. We didn't know we would have the capabilities to do some of the things we can do. We can farm down to an inch. Our fertilizer doesn't overlap. We know exactly where we are all the time. Our equipment is so good that we can watch movies on an iPad while we're planting and harvesting. We just have to hit pause to turn around. That's how far we've come. Now, one of the best parts about the precision ag and the conservation in ag is if you combine the two, we can really make ourselves a lot more profitable. And we can verify that. The precision ag allows us to look at our information after a year is over and say, hey, we did a better job, and we can see it in the bank account. That's the most important thing there is to farming, especially right now. If we can make better decisions and we can not lose money at the end of a year, that's huge. We never would have been able to quantify that without some of the benefits of precision ag, and we couldn't have recognized it without the benefits of conservation. That's as simple as a message as I can really give anybody, is that it's the same as in any business. Put your money where it counts, make good decisions, use all the data you have available to make those decisions, and hit the repeat button. I've spent a lot of time working with other growers, talking about precision ag, but more talking about conservation in ag. My role as a registered TSP through NRCS has given me the chance to go out and talk to people and see what they're doing now, what they could be doing, and maybe find out why they're not doing anything differently. But again, there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle, but at some point we have to start figuring it out by being on the ground, talking to them, figuring out what it is we can do. Is it more money? Is it more incentive? Is it just somebody there to hold your hand when you need some help? What's it going to take to do a better job? I know farmers are willing to step up and do that, not only to help the environment, because things look better when they do, but to keep their businesses going, which is, at the end of the day, that's all our main goal. I want to thank you all again for the chance to be here. This really is an honor. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Madison. We appreciate your comments. Dr. Carson, you may begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Spanberger and Ranking Member Lamalafa, and distinguished members of the committee for this opportunity to discuss the conservation benefits of precision agriculture, which are significant. Precision agriculture technologies enable farmers to understand and manage the spatial variability on their farms and better respond to changes during the season. These tools can help farmers be more cost-effective and apply inputs and management, reduce environmental impacts of agriculture, and manage for resilience and ecosystem services. For instance, with fine resolution knowledge about their fields, farmers can avoid over-applying or applying inputs where it would not be cost-effective, such as fertilizers, pesticides, seeds, irrigation. This can avoid loss of inputs to the environment, reduction of water resources, or in the case of pesticides, the loss of biodiversity and the risk of selecting for pest resistance to pesticides. Precision agricultural technologies can also help farmers identify zones or subfields that could be more profitable with different management that can also provide conservation benefits. For instance, in zones that are not profitable or low profit, farmers might decide to plant different crops that are better suited and more profitable, or adopt conservation practices that can reduce erosion, build soil health, and be more resilient to climate change. There are zones that may be more vulnerable to extreme weather and may be better suited for conservation or set-aside plantings. And when they are assisted with decision support tools and decision support systems that include ecosystem, agroecosystem, computer simulation models, land managers can also evaluate the impact of possible management changes. Decision support systems can help them identify practices that best meet their goals, whether they include profitability, resilience to stress, long-term productivity, and environmental stewardship. The greatest barriers of farmer adoption, from what we understand, are the cost of capital investments needed to adopt precision technologies, the technical expertise needed, and the perceived risks of adoption. Land grants are ideally suited to address these adoption barriers. With our mission of education, research, and extension education, land grants can help farmers of all sizes benefit from precision technologies. We are, and we can do more to teach students to understand and benefit from the site-specific knowledge and precision ag tools to enhance their farm profitability and environmental benefits. Our graduates can contribute to developing these technologies and assisting others with adoption. Through research, we develop tools that can improve access to fine resolution information and work with farmers to provide more reliable recommendations. We can increase access with tools that are low cost, free online, or open access or open source, and we can improve our understanding and the predictions of how agroecosystems respond to management changes and extreme weather, so that we can better identify which crops, soils, pest, and water management practices are most resilient, profitable, and environmentally friendly. And finally, through extension, we can help farmers adopt precision agricultural technology and evaluate the tools on their farms. Through that boots-on-the-ground approach, extension can assist growers and others in the agricultural community, including folks in our assistance agencies, consultants, and input providers to help benefit farmers in conservation goals and long-term sustainable productivity. Thank you. I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Cameron, you may proceed when you are ready.
Thank you, Chairwoman Spanberger and Ranking Member LaMalfa and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the California Farm Bureau Federation. I'm Don Cameron, President and General Manager of Terra Nova Ranch in Helm, California, which is in the central San Joaquin Valley. I also serve as President for the California State Board of Food and Agriculture. The California Farm Bureau represents nearly 36,000 members across 53 counties, contributing to the largest ag economy of any state in the nation. Our farmers and ranchers provide food, fiber, and feed for our local communities, the nation, and across the globe. At Terra Nova, as you heard, we produce about 25 different crops on 7,000 acres. Some of them include processing tomatoes, peppers, onions, carrots, almonds, pistachios, walnuts, and a longer list that I won't get into. But our diversified farming practices encourage our biological systems to be productive, beneficial, and diverse. Our on-farm practices include building infrastructure to implement on-farm groundwater recharge, installation of pressurized irrigation systems, installation of solar generation systems, and irrigation technologies for energy efficiency using practices that help maintain a diverse wildlife habitat, and upgrading our farm equipment with cleaner engines for better air quality. I wish to raise several considerations for the subcommittee to be aware of as you consider federal policy relative to conservation, precision agriculture, and water certainty. First, it's essential that farms have flexibility to try new ways of farming that might improve their practices. While we've had great success in some areas, we've also had failures in others. The adoption of processes that can be extremely costly and time-consuming. Practices that work well for our operation do not necessarily work well for the neighboring operation or for another farming region. Second, farmers and ranchers are at the ready to adopt new technologies and practices, but it's critical that they're readily available, scientifically trialed, and affordable to the operation and the crops being grown. Pressurized irrigation systems are generally more costly to install and operate than furrow irrigation techniques and may not be economically feasible for every crop or operation. Additionally, these systems may rely on a new skill set and additional investments in training that need to be made. Third, we must also be cognizant of the unintended consequences that can exist with resource decision-making. Industrial pumps, motors, on-demand pressurized drip lines, tailwater recovery, recirculation of water for the reuse can result in increased energy demand and a time shift on when energy demand occurs. While precision agriculture can assist producers while reducing their consumptive water use, the unintended consequences can be less water returning to the groundwater below the crop. In light of these considerations I offered above, also follow the following recommendations to the subcommittee for consideration. First, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program is by far the most utilized program in California, assisting producers achieving greater conservation goals. We particularly thank you for including funding for the air quality incentives, which have been incredibly important to farmers in California who face strict air quality standards. The RCPP has also allowed infrastructure conveyance to be extended in many areas with groundwater recharge projects like ourselves. It's essential that NRCS technical assistance funding is commensurate to voluntary financial assistance levels, assisting producers with their adoption. Secondly, it's important to realize that there's no one size that fits all for precision ag practices. Each field crop and operation will have different conservation and economic needs to factor in, and we must be cautious in making value judgments and use our motivation and resources to identify the proper mix of new or alternative practices or technologies that work in each unique circumstance. Third, a complete solution that requires both improved management of both demand and supply side of the equation. We must be doing a better job investing in water infrastructure and capturing water resources when they're available. Water infrastructure and investments should also be made more attractive and affordable for non-federal interests. Access to broadband will help ensure availability of on-demand regional, statewide, and national weather resources, and is foundational for irrigation scheduling and other on-farm decision-making. We recommend that Congress work with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Federal Communications Committee, to fund programs to solve these critical rural broadband problems. The Farm Bureau appreciates the time and attention that the subcommittee has given to this important topic today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And thank you for letting me go over a minute.
Thank you very much to the witnesses for their initial testimony. Members will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival. I'll first recognize myself for 5 minutes. And I'd like to begin by thanking Mr. Madison for making reference to the conservation efforts that have been vital across the Commonwealth of Virginia in restoring the Chesapeake Bay, and the important role that farmers and producers have played in that ongoing work that we are doing here in Virginia, or just next door in Virginia. Mr. Cameron, you mentioned broadband internet and that farmers can reap the benefit of a full range of options afforded by precision agriculture, and that without connectivity through rural broadband, there are hindrances. Even in areas with broadband access, the internet connection speed is not always fast enough or predictable enough to support precision agriculture technology. Can you speak to the importance of high-speed internet in maximizing conservation efforts? And as we're here in Congress considering policy approaches that help expand broadband access and enable the uptake of precision ag tools, is there anything in particular that you think we should keep in mind?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Broadband is a near and dear problem that I take very seriously. On our farm, we're probably 100 miles away from the Silicon Valley. We're lucky to get 4 megabits up and down on our farm, which on most days is somewhere around 2. It's like a dial-up service. It's so bad. We have poor telephone connection with cellular within our operation. But with broadband, we can interconnect our whole farm. We can monitor wells, we can monitor flow rates, we can turn on and off wells, irrigation systems from our phone. But without the access, not only do we suffer as a business and we're at a disadvantage, but also our rural communities that have children that are moving on to college can't even fill out a college application online because of the poor broadband service. I just feel that this is extremely important for precision agriculture. We need to be connected, and somehow the rural economy has been left out of the picture. When I hear of 1 gigabyte in some cities in California, you know, I just can't believe that we can't do better.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Madison, in your work as a farmer, a consultant, and a member of multiple advisory committees, which federal programs that aim to facilitate the adoption of precision agriculture tools do you see as particularly relevant in Central Virginia? And how could these programs be improved, in your opinion? And I also welcome you to comment on the question I posed to Mr. Cameron related to broadband and how lack of accessibility, lack of access in Louisa County impacts your day-to-day work.
Thanks. I'm going to start with the broadband. I'm going to look at it a little bit differently and say that a lot of what we use internet access for in precision ag on our farm is the work that happens after the season and before the season. That's where all the planning comes into play that makes the precision ag piece work in the field. That's a lot of internet usage. I can't take my laptop and sit in McDonald's all day to find Wi-Fi to do this kind of stuff. You know, our business depends on it. So it's very important that we have a way to use the tools that we invest money in, that we take the time to learn and get the most out of what we're doing. To the conservation programs, precision programs, EQIP has always been really good to us. It fills a lot of needs. It covers a lot of ground if you have the whole EQIP playbook to work with. Sometimes, at least in my experience in Virginia, we don't always have that whole playbook to work with. I guess on the downside of that is when it comes to some of the CAT plans for nutrient management, the technical service provider stuff that is promoted from NRCS. Well, at the federal level, it doesn't really get promoted at the state level. I've been a TSP for either 4 or 5 years. NRCS personnel has directed me to write 3 plans. That's not a lot. There's a lot of opening for it. The plans that I've written, everybody was really into it. They were glad they were getting something, because if they didn't have that, they would have gone back to old style practices, throw a bunch of fertilizer out there, see what happens. So we've got really good programs. We just need a little bit more follow through on them at the state level.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Ranking Member LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you again. Mr. Cameron, let's just, get to the nuts and bolts of this. How is conservation associated with or helped with, as we see farm income struggling and the condition of agriculture in this country is pretty rough. How has conservation helped you with your bottom line going forward?
I know that when we adopted subsurface drip irrigation on our farm with precise application of nutrients, insecticides, and water, that we actually found our water use decreased by 30%, and that our yield increased by 25% on processing tomatoes. We did a 1-year trial in 2009, and then in 2010, we converted every acre we had of tomatoes and started with some of the other crops to subsurface drip irrigation. So we had an immediate benefit from that. We were ahead of the curve, so we were able to capture better income for quite a few years before the rest of the industry caught up with what we had done. That allowed us to purchase new equipment with cleaner engines. So it was almost like a snowball effect that once we got started down that track, it gave us additional income that we could spend to improve other operations of the farm. So we found that some of these precision techniques have been really beneficial to us over the years.
Thank you. Mr. Madison, you care to add to that?
I would say the same thing in a lot of our regards, especially in there were some initial advantages to going down some conservation routes, but over time they get amplified. No-till gets better as you stick with it. Cover crop in a field gets better as you stick with it. More targeted fertilizer application typically saves you money more each year you do it. There's a lot of opportunity for that to build upon itself. So I would say it's a really big deal in what we do.
Yeah, thank you. And I note that it on the fertilizer application, if you can tailor it to what the need is, you get uniformity of yield, or you get closer to that, which helps with ripening and timing on harvest. For both of you here, do you feel that the current voluntary conservation programs are adaptable at this point to your conservation needs these days? Are they as adaptable as you need, or do we need to do more work?
So the programs that, a lot of the conservation programs, these conservation reserve programs really haven't been effective or that effective in California in the typical agriculture production areas, because we tend to farm every square inch that we have. We just feel that that's the way we need to be profitable. We've taken a slightly different approach to that lately, and are dedicating part of our farm to different pollinator habitats. We have a monarch project where we put in milkweed with Environmental Defense Fund. We've made partnerships with Sustainable Conservation, UC Davis, some of the universities to do some additional precision work on the farm. But as far as, like I say, we think EQIP is great. We think the RCPP program is excellent for a larger area, bringing farmers together for one goal. We think it's a very effective way to bring new infrastructure on farm and onto the region.
Mr. Madison, you agree, or how's it look for you?
Yeah, definitely. Voluntary conservation efforts, even if they may be incentivized from EQIP or RCPP or any other thing that we can find, they're all beneficial. you don't have to twist people's arm too much to get them to go down that route of some conservation practices once they see a year or two down the road that they did realize an advantage.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I yield back, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentleman from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, thank you for scheduling this hearing on the important conservation benefits of using precision agriculture. The University of Arizona operates the Maricopa Agriculture Center in my district in partnership with the USDA. The MAC is dedicated to developing and delivering the best integrated agriculture technologies for problems faced by Arizona consumers and producers. One example of their work includes using drones equipped with special imaging sensors to monitor crop development. This technology provides researchers with more precision information on the crop's condition. I have scratched out a lot of my statement here because what I've heard is, I'm concerned with what I've heard today. You know, it's like rural Arizona has been forgotten, and America has been forgotten in the technology and knowledge-based economy. My district is the size of Illinois. I go around my district, and 50% of the time, not only can't I connect to the internet, I don't have cell coverage at all. And that's a problem in the West especially. You go down in a valley somewhere, even if you're close to town, you're missing it. I heard Mr. Madison easily describe getting to a McDonald's. In many of the towns in my area, McDonald's is the after-school program to get onto the internet. I just I don't understand a country that was able to get telephone to every bit of this country is in this situation today. And if we expect the people of rural America to do what we need them to do and keep them there and allow them to have a quality of life, then we have to do something much better than we are. Now, urban America, with all this high speed and everything, they get their water from rural America, their food from rural America, their energy from rural America. The whole concept of transportation, that's where in many cases, their vacation home is at. That's where they go on tourism. And we have to have people out there. They don't need to be moving into cities, and yet we have our young people, after they get out of college, hopefully, if they're able to get there because of lack of educational opportunity, we have them going to cities in order to find jobs and leaving farming and the agriculture industry. Our country can't afford to go down this path any further. And I'm glad we had this hearing today, but we have to start to acknowledge as a body that we just aren't going in the direction we need to be going. I struggle. I go to the research center twice a year and find that all this stuff that they're doing, it's for naught. People just aren't able to use it if you're further away from a city or town. And I see no real program here in Congress that has adopted to the realization of this. They're underfunded programs, whether they're out of the USDA or out of any other committee here. They're not coordinated. We have to have numerous people out there and being told when we know people want it and need it, that it's just too costly to get out there. And with 5G coming along, people are going to demand even higher speeds. Tremendous amounts of money are going to be put into this. And so if there's a gap between rural America and urban America, that gap's only going to increase. And that is something that I just don't want for the children of rural America. I don't want it for our rural communities, our agriculture communities. And so I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm going to yield back and thank the panel for being here today.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona for expressing a frustration that I think is shared for many of us who represent rural communities throughout the country. I now recognize Ranking Member Conaway for 5 minutes.
Thank you, like the Chairman. Ms. Carson, the LandGrant Schools are the best way that we communicate research and other things to actual producers. Can you talk to us about the kinds of resources that LandGrant Schools provide for producers in translating all this technology and precision agriculture into actual operations on their farms and ranches? What role are you all playing in that regard?
Yes, I think that the first opportunity, or what we do, is to train students, to teach students, and we have graduates who, as soon as they're finished with their degrees, they're hired to work in this area of conservation and precision agriculture. And so that's an important role that land grants provide in preparing people for the workforce. And there's lots of opportunities to do more of that. There are some online education types of programs that Broadband would be needed for, but that can reach a broader audience. In terms of research, we are producing free online, decision support tools and access to data that's gathered through, for instance, remote sensing or satellite imagery. So if a farmer can't afford the sensors to create a yield map to put on their combine, there are tools in the Satellite Vegetation Index that we can use to create these yield maps to help them do more precision management and identify opportunities to increase their profitability and optimize conservation.
So I guess that was the question. You've got those tools, you've got those resources. How do you get that communicated to the producers out there? The extension, how does that producer know that's available, or any producers know that that's available for their region?
Right. So the partnership with Extension and researchers and with Extension and other educators like the NRCS and consultants, crop consultants, nutrition consultants, is key. And there are more opportunities and quite honestly, I think the need for more funding to extend those activities and expand those activities to reach more growers and more practitioners or consultants with these tools. There are, some of these tools we're still identifying how to optimize the interface, the user-friendly access, and that kind of dialogue between the users, the educators, researchers is key. There are opportunities for on-farm research, for Extension to help farmers evaluate these technologies, and then to facilitate peer-to-peer learning. We know that farmers are more comfortable adopting something if it's been successful for their community and their neighbors, and often support just to help bring farmers to different educational events can be very impactful. And just helping them, I've talked to colleagues who say someone invested a lot of money in this technology and then they couldn't use it because they couldn't figure out how to, download the right software and sync it to their database computer and their monitors, their combines, their planters. And that kind of technical assistance, which we need to teach our students to do, but also help our educators, our extension providers provide that, is critical.
So thank you. Mr. Cameron, you used a phrase that I was not familiar with, pressurized irrigation systems. Would you explain to me what that is? And you also said pressurized drip. Is that the same thing?
Typically, it's the same thing, although because when you do drip irrigation, you do need to pressurize your system. It could be low pressure, it may only be 10 or 12 pounds per square inch, but and we also use precision, highly efficient sprinklers for some of the crops that we grow, carrots and onions that require sprinkler application. So yeah, when we pressurize, it takes energy to run those booster pumps to drive the system.
So these are on the sprinklers. You need pressure more than just the normal load from your source.
Right. We may, because we pump almost all of our water from the groundwater.
Okay.
We bring it up, and then we have to add another pump to take it up for sprinklers up to 60 pounds per square inch.
I guess. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be remiss if not referring our folks to the 18 Farm Bill that did have extensive broadband activities in there. It requires coordination between FCC and USDA on the ways that they're trying to get at this. But I concur with my colleagues that without it, we're going to keep rural America behind the curve on that. But we have taken a look at it. You're back.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Maine.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing, and to all the witnesses for being here today. Just so Maine isn't left out, I want to make sure that I concur with all my colleagues on the challenges of broadband. Maine is always, we're the most rural state in the nation. We're always in the bottom 10% of connection and speed, so we feel everyone else's pain. And while I've been a part of working on things like the Farm Bill and more appropriations, I think there are some structural issues that could continue to keep rural America from being connected, and some of it just has to do with our system of private providers who just don't want to go that last mile. Sometimes it's the last 20 miles to get out there, and we have to take a much more serious look at this. But thank you for what you're talking about. In my state, for the most part, we have a lot more small to medium-sized farmers, and some of what you're talking about, I think, requires a big investment. So can you talk a little bit about which of these applications you think apply or are useful or could be converted for use for small to medium-sized farmers? And also, I guess you've talked a little bit about it, but just the continuing need for technical assistance. Farmers can't all be data managers and operate all this equipment. So I think you're talking a little bit about that, and I know some of you are even playing that role. But anyway, just a little bit more about, is there value for other farmers?
Was that?
Anybody?
I would offer that we know that we can help farmers have access to yield maps to better site-specific manage subzones or fields or subfields without necessarily having only the yield monitor maps. And that's an example, I think, of how there are opportunities for farmers of all different sizes to then fine-tune their management and make sure what they use in that location is profitable and that it is going to be long-term, profitable in the long term. If they can adopt more diverse rotations and conservation practices like reduced tillage and continuous cover, they can retain more nutrients on their farm, they can interrupt pest life cycles, provide habitat for beneficials, and there are multiple benefits that come with these conservation practices like soil health and resilience to stress. Mm-hmm. I'll defer to others.
Well, let me throw in another question, unless one of you was about to, were you about to answer that?
Wanted to just mention one other thing on broadband. We were approached by a large company for bringing broadband in. Since nobody ever comes to us and tells us they're going to do that, so of course we said, sure, let's do it. They came back to us and told us that it would be $850,000 to bring 20 up, 20 down dedicated to our operation. So of course, we didn't do it.
Yeah. I mean, we hear a lot of stories about that, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 to get it to a rural community.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and 850 is sort of off the charts.
Yeah, I was just going to echo the technical assistance providers, I think, are critical to get this information out to the growers, to their level. On-farm projects, anything they can do to help the growers adapt, I think, is beneficial. So I think it's an integral part of the NRCS program.
I would add that, in Pennsylvania, we have a lot of people who don't use the internet, Amish and other cultures, and so we know that we need to produce hard copy educational materials and do field events and conferences in the communities, work with growers through extension educators, and that's also the really, face-to-face, on the farm, really site-specific kinds of work that extension does and can do more of. And we have tools that you don't need a computer necessarily. You can use pen and paper. An example would be one of my colleagues who's helping farmers better manage their nitrogen by crediting the fact that they've built soil organic matter and that they have cover crops in the system that are retaining and supplying nitrogen to the crops so that then they don't have to buy an input to supply that nitrogen. There are other tools like that. Yes, they're online, but they also are in the forms that we can use in the field. And that's, the important opportunity with extension.
That's great. I think I'm about to run out of time, but thank you so much for your testimony and the work that you're doing out there. Thanks.
I now recognize Mr. Allen from Georgia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I want to thank the panel for being here today and commenting on the this amazing technology that's driving the largest industry in my state, agriculture, and the largest industry in my district. Dr. Carson, as you know, we have the University of Georgia there in the state. It's a land-grant institution, and you know, their researchers are committed to helping farmers maximize crop yields while minimizing their resource usage. And precision agriculture plays a key role in that. Can you provide a brief overview of what type of resources land-grant universities like Penn State and the University of Georgia can provide for our farmers when training them to adopt these practices on the farms? In other words, how do we get it from the research to the farmers, and how do we do that with the bottom line that they're working with right now?
Well, some of the extension activities that we do with farmers on their farms to help them evaluate technologies, but also to adopt these new decision support tools or these technologies are critical. Often they need assistance both in terms of the technology, but also in interpreting what the recommendations are from, say, a decision support tool and technical assistance. There's also, we see a lot of our graduates are the people who go out and provide that technical assistance, and it's not only through extension, although that's a very critical role, but because they go to work in the workforce in other agencies, and that partnership that land grants provide to work with input providers or you know, the folks developing some of this technology can keep the communication about, well, how do we make this available and accessible? And how do we make this a tool that they could use online or that they could use on their phone? So there are lots of apps, for instance, that we are producing so that a farmer on their phone can integrate what's the cost of this feed or this input, and what are the potential ways they could save money and increase their long-term productivity.
Right. That's what technology is all about, and which kind of brings me to my next question. And you know, each of you have talked about the barriers to adopting this precision agriculture in your testimony. And what steps can this body, the United States Congress, do to help reduce these barriers? For example, obviously we've talked about, you know, it sounds like your biggest challenge is cell phone service and broadband, and the cost associated with delivering that service to deliver precision ag. Is that what I'm hearing? Would you, Mr. Cameron and Mr. Madison, care to comment on that?
Yeah, we know that when we do aerial photos every week of our crops during the season when they're growing, and if it takes us 2 minutes to download a photo of one field, you know, our time is precious. I mean, we have a lot of things going on at the same time, and it makes it difficult to do the work we need and to bring the technology on board so that we can affect change in the field with either nutrient levels, water delivery. So it's a big stumbling block for us, and I don't mean to belabor it, but it's a serious issue in the rural community. Because we get bombarded with tech companies from Silicon Valley that want to cure problems we don't even have, but we just have seen, you know, a lot of projects come our way, and some, you know, we tend to be the one that filters them out, whether the ones that sound promising we try, others we show them the door, but there's a lot of technology that's coming into agriculture, but yeah, we need a different caliber of employee coming on farm that knows how to handle and implement technology that's available.
That's why it's important to support our young farmers.
Exactly. I agree.
I'll yield back. I'm out of time. Sorry, Mr. Madison. You can comment on that next time you ask a question.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Iowa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman and Ranking Member, and thank you for holding this very important hearing, and thank you so much to our witnesses for being here today. I'm very grateful to have you here. I won't belabor the point of broadband, even though that's one of my questions, but I would encourage all of you to continue to promote it. I'm on the WIP's Rural Broadband Task Force. We know how important this is, and by gosh, we're determined to make sure that this gets out to rural America on so many levels, from precision agriculture to keeping people healthy. So please, the more voices we have in this, absolutely the better. We'd love to hear it. Want to just go back to another topic then related to some of the natural disasters that we're facing and the impact on agriculture. We all know that farmers have always been on the cutting edge of technology in utilizing new advances to increase efficiency and yields while using less inputs. Over the last few decades, we've seen a heck of a lot of movement in this. We've seen farms integrate satellite technology to better manage their acres and to make smarter decisions with better information. And since 1960, the average yield per acre of seed corn has more than tripled, largely due to improved technology and adoption of precision ag, which has led to significant benefits for conservation by reducing inputs, leading to less waste and more efficient use of energy. So the benefits of precision agriculture are clear, and I'm glad we're here today to discuss that and what we can continue to do further when it comes to resiliency. If you haven't seen the news lately, farmers in my district have had a real tough year. I'm from Iowa's 3rd district, with issues of low commodity prices being exacerbated by a trade war and, of course, a biofuels program that's being undermined. And on top of this, we've had record amounts of water, and then some of the worst flooding we've seen in my district. It's literally been the most historic flooding. So we're in bad straits there. The flooding has devastated communities around the Missouri River and resulted in over 100,000 farm acres being flooded and billions of dollars of damage. And while, of course, flood prevention is our #1 priority in making these folks whole and making sure that we cover things like uninsured grain and bins, we must also be prepared for recovery and work to improve resiliency. Dr. Carson, I'm wondering, farmers in my district and across the Midwest have seen changing rainfall patterns in recent years, and as farmers adjust to unpredictable weather and changes in precipitation, how can precision agriculture technology help our farms grow more resilient against these issues?
Yes, I think that the example of using the landscape variability to identify regions that are most vulnerable to extreme weather events, that have shallow soils, low organic matter, et cetera, and have not yielded profitably consistently over time, is an excellent example of how those regions can be managed specifically for best, long-term productivity and profitability. And so that might mean that a farmer can identify a zone that's in a floodplain or that's very shallow on a steep slope that would be better served than the typical annual crop rotation that they have by planting perennials, that once they're planted, they're established for many, many years, and they can retain water and nutrients, but with those deep root systems and maintain productivity either for forages or biofuel, energy crops, or bedding, and still produce a profitable product in a region that they would have actually been losing money and would have frequently experienced the impacts of these extreme weather events. So that kind of site-specific, opportunity is, I think, prime, and there's lots of examples of research in Iowa that have identified these zones that are losing money, very significant losses that can be overcome with site-specific management and things like perennials or conservation practices that build soil health and increase water infiltration and resilience to stress. Would want to defer.
So when I look at resiliency in agriculture, we look at healthy soils. We know that we can build increased organic matter, sequester carbon, ways that we can hold water longer, which you may not have wanted this year. But in California, we went through a 5-year drought, and believe me, every drop of water we want to hold either above ground or below ground for use at a later time. With better soil health, I think you You can control your nutrients. They're not going to be leaching. They're just great ways that you can increase production. Even, we're looking in California at a program of incorporating a whole almond orchard at the end of its life, chipping it and putting all of that biomass back into the ground so that carbon will be sequestered, and you'll have additional organic matter long term. So I think we're working in California the same as you do at the federal level to improve soil health.
Thank you. We'd trade water with you any day if we could.
We'd love it.
Thank you, Ms. Axney. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington State for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for letting me crash your subcommittee, I think twice in about a week here. I want to thank you all for being here. And Mr. Madison, you raised a really interesting topic that I'm hoping you can expand on. It's the use of the TSPs, the technical service providers, to support NRCS staff in the field. And one of the things that I routinely hear from my farmers who are trying to do the right thing with resilient farming and healthy soil and drill seeding machines is that they need additional technical assistance to help them enroll in conservation programs and then do the work. And so I was wondering if you could speak about your experience and what technical service providers can offer farmers.
Yeah, a TSP is basically a privatized NRCS employee. We can write the conservation plans, we can inspect them, we can kind of offer advice, do a lot of that face-to-face thing with the grower that the NRCS staff does, but we're not full-time employees. So that's supposed to be the best of both worlds. I think part of what makes that a successful kind of program, as long as it's promoted to growers, is that a farmer, a customer farmer to NRCS can work through some of this stuff without having to go to the government to get help. And they're still going through that process, but inherently, farmers at some point don't want to go sit in a government office to work through conservation issues. That's just the way it is. If they can go to another grower or a private individual and work through some of that, they tend to be a little more open. It's a little bit easier process to get through. And it's a cumbersome process no matter how you go about it. So anything you can do to make it easier is going to really increase the chance that it's successful at the end of the project.
And I understand that about the government offices. What kind of training did you go through? Was it all kind of in your own experience training? How did you learn and then leverage to help your colleagues?
It's basically, your past experience. I had to provide references from growers who I'd worked with in the past, work experience. At the time, I'd had several years working in retail, selling fertilizer, selling seed. I had a certified crop advisor certification. That helped in it. A certified nutrient management planner in Virginia. All those things kind of go in there together, and somebody reviews it somewhere on the other side of that computer screen and tells you if it's enough. And in my case, it was enough.
That's great, thank you. I was also struck by your testimony of working in the fields all day long until 9 or 10 at night tilling, and then if it rained the next day, you lost all of that rich topsoil. And so then I was listening to you, Mr. Cameron, talk about soil health and not tilling. I have a really interesting picture posted in my office of two farms on different sides of a street, one farmed with no-till and the other conventional. And after a flood, the conventional farm is far underwater and the other one has absorbed that moisture. So it holds it in periods of drought and rain. But you're by the Chesapeake Bay, and you wanted to avoid runoff there. I'm by the Columbia River and Puget Sound, and so I was just wondering if you could comment on some of the things that you have found have helped protecting your natural waters.
The basics were a really good start. And when I say the basics, I mean nutrient management, cover crops, and no-till. And in Virginia, they're starting to sound old. Everybody already does that stuff. Nobody wants to talk about it anymore. But I know in other parts of the country, that's not the case. And I think the reason it sounds old in Virginia is because we all do it because we have all kind of figured out that it works. And there's nothing better than using other farmers as examples. We're all pack animals. If we see somebody else do something, we want to go do it too, or at least try it.
And in my last 16 seconds, do you have any ideas about how to get that to the rest of the country? Because I do think farmers listen to farmers more than they'll listen to me.
In Virginia, it was not a very fast process. You had to just keep hammering away on that point. Now we've got, through Precision Ag, we can do case studies a lot better. We can actually put numbers to things. In the past, it was kind of, do this, it'll work, I promise. There's now we can break it out, and I can cover you with spreadsheets and layers of data that prove to you that it worked over a few years. That's going to be important as we go forward with farmers needing to make it on narrow margins. They'll follow the money.
Thank you very much, and thank you for what you've done.
I thank the gentlewoman from Washington State for talking so much about Virginia. With the first round of questions completed and without objection, we will begin a second round of questions. Members who wish to be recognized will be recognized for 5 minutes in order of seniority, and I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Cameron, I think we touched upon an interesting topic when you mentioned very briefly the almond groves. So precision agriculture technologies do vary significantly by commodity type. And unlike row crops, not all specialty crops are planted annually. And additionally, specialty crops tend to have unique planting, harvesting, packaging processes, and production operations. What role have you seen, or what role can precision agriculture play when it comes to other crops beyond row crops?
So I'll stick with one of our many, and that would be our processing tomatoes. You know, we research varieties that we want to grow prior to planting. We look at yield data, university work that's been done, and then we deal with our processor, who really tends to dictate our schedule of harvest. But when we look at a crop like that, we use precision irrigation for watering. We do petiole soil tests. We monitor the plant as it grows. We apply the fertilizer that's only what's needed, and we have irrigation scheduling, so we monitor the inputs very closely. But when we get to harvest, we harvest 24 hours, 7 days a week, from early July until October. And when a load of our tomatoes, a 25-ton load of tomatoes, heads to a cannery, we get a grade from the California Department of Food and Ag that I can access 5 minutes after the load gets to the cannery. It puts it by variety, by field. It'll calculate the income from that load. It'll show me any deductions that I may have. And it'll, like I say, it'll give me a yield per field as we move through our different parts of the ranch. So the technology is there for a crop like that. The results help me in determining how to set our harvester as we progress on different varieties. And I guess that takes you to harvest. I mean, that it's pretty intense, but it's very, really the information we get instantaneously. But like I say, we either have to have a phone connection or the broadband, so.
And if you wouldn't mind just answering a couple questions related to that process. So you said within 5 minutes you're getting information back from the cannery related to that, those tomatoes. So when that's happening early in the season, based on that feedback, are you able to, or do you frequently make adjustments to your crop based on what you're hearing back from the cannery?
Yes, we can make adjustments. We can either, you know, we have electronics on our cannery, on our harvester that will actually put green tomatoes back on the ground. If we may have an issue with the harvester, it'll show us immediately from the time it leaves, from the time it's picked to the time it hits the canner or the grade station is probably within 2 hours or less. So we can make adjustments to our harvester. We can get a hold of our guys. They can access this at 2 o'clock in the morning in the field, provided they have a connection. So, yeah, no, it's extremely valuable, and we will adjust moving forward. We'll either slow down harvest or speed up harvest depending on the quality we see. So it's really informative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cameron. And Mr. Madison, with your experiences, if you could just talk for a moment about some of the precision ag technology that you employ on your farm, whether your experiences are similar in terms of your ability to adjust relatively quickly, or how it impacts your day-to-day in Virginia.
Yeah, our biggest assets as far as precision go, yield monitors they kind of grade us at the end of the year, tell us what we did right, what we did wrong, or tell us if we tried something new, whether or not that worked. All of our GPS technology is somehow tied back to the precision work that we set up at the beginning of the year, whether it's not overlapping seed, not overlapping fertilizer, making sure we're putting everything in really exactly where it needs to go. The big difference in commodity farming, after we get that grade at the end of the year, we don't get to change anything for 6 months. We don't get to change a lot on the go. There are some things maybe in season that we can do when we're making some fertilizer applications here and there, but overall that's a really minor part of what we've used.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Cameron, you get the travel award here. As I note each week, it's about an 18-hour round trip here, and so to spend that many hours traveling and taxi rides and hotel rooms and all that stuff, you probably get a grand total of 20 to 25 minutes of testimony time. So I'd like to throw it to you and see if there's anything you'd like to touch on. I'd give you a possible topic with water conservation. How about at the macro level on how our lakes are managed and how much water is running out the delta, and how beneficial that would be to capture more of that with more dynamic weather forecasting and reality that, you know, they're looking at a possible drought situation or a low rain situation in California, yet they're letting water out of Shasta Dam right now. So that and opportunity for groundwater recharge, Sigma coming down the pike. What would you say about the bigger picture of water conservation for California?
You know, water is always the #1 issue in California. It's either the lack of or too much at the wrong time. You know, we have an old infrastructure in place that needs to be updated. We need conveyance to move water to areas where it's needed. I mean, it'd be great if it fell uniformly throughout the state, but it doesn't. It tends to fall as snowfall in the northern part of the state, and we have a difficult time moving it through the delta because of endangered species law that precludes some of the movement. You're right. We get a tremendous amount of water that goes out of the delta into the ocean. You know, we figured out a long time ago that it was, you know, we saw declining water tables in our region and decided to do something about it, and that was to take floodwater and move it on farm and start recharging groundwater. But like I say, the projects like that are expensive. We got help from a grant from the Department of Water Resources in California. It was supposed to be a $5 million grant plus a $2 million match on our side. Because of all the reporting, the environmental regulations that we had and hoops we had to jump through and agreements we had to get in place, it took us 6 years from the time we got the grant till the time we started construction, which was last year. We hope to have it finished this year, but the price in the meantime went up to about $11 to $12 million. So we know that these projects are costly, but I think the growers in California understand without it, the prediction is we're going to be seeing anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million acres of farmland in Central California being idled in the next 20 years with sustainable groundwater management. So we need real solutions. We have a treasure. We have a national treasure in the San Joaquin Valley, and to see it sit idle because of a lack of water is wrong.
Yeah, we have the opportunity to raise Shasta Dam 18 feet, 600,000 more acre feet on those years that it would fill, and then the opportunity right now to be filling San Luis Reservoir. Do you draw from San Luis?
I do on one farm, but the majority is pumped groundwater, which is really under the microscope right now.
Does anybody disagree that the groundwater recharge and the infrastructure needed for that, does anybody disagree with those projects? Is there environmental groups that are against that?
From what we've seen, we have a great amount of support, although I did find one person at a meeting that was outspoken that, for whatever reason, didn't think that was a good idea. We understand that with groundwater recharge on farmland, you have to have a different set of best practices. You're going to have to farm differently because we don't want to push nitrates into the groundwater or any pesticides that we may have applied. So we're doing a base study with Department of Pesticide Regulation currently at the state level, monitoring our water as a baseline before we really get into this heavily. And we're also doing ground radar with Stanford and UC Davis and coring. So we're going to be a test bed for groundwater recharge as we started the project in 2011, and we're the innovators to bring this in. It's now got a life of its own in California.
Yeah. Well, I know the Bureau is looking at rejiggering things a little bit on saving water in the reservoirs and using more dynamic weather, forecasting on how we can more aggressively keep our reservoirs full and make more of this possible. So
no, we'd like to see a lot better long-term forecasting as well for agriculture. We've been neglected, I think, as we have in other areas. So
yeah, well, we're
services
working on
have been cut back.
Both ends. So appreciate your time and travel here to all of our panelists. Thank you, and I'll yield back. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Washington State for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did have a couple more questions. So, Dr. Carson, Washington State University is not in my district, but it is close to my district. And so there is a phenomenal partnership between WSU and agricultural research and service and our farmers. And so Washington State University's Center for Precision and Automated Agriculture Systems hosted an Ag Technology Day last summer to look at automation and specialty crops. Experts from WSU, the Washington State Department of Labor, Microsoft Farm Beats, and ASI Robots explored the theme of automation and specialty crop production. And I specifically wanted to draw attention to the amazing work that Microsoft Farm Beats is doing in Washington State. It's an end-to-end AI and IoT system for agriculture that gathers data from sensors, cameras, drones, I think robots also to produce real actionable insights for farmers, and it can extend internet coverage provided there's somewhere near the farm to the farm, and it's resilient towards weather and power outages. So I was wondering if you have similar partnerships in Washington State. A natural one is with Microsoft, and we saw something similar in Israel where they had robots that were taking cameras and figuring out what was going on with plants there. What are some of the partnerships you've found?
Well, first I would say that I actually don't work in specialty crops. I am aware of some of the work that my colleagues are doing to improve these and develop these technologies, such as using cameras and imaging and water sensors and other sensors in orchards and specialty crops. The work that I know is work that's being done by faculty with growers and extension, and some of it is free online. The pest management data, for instance, so they can monitor pests, are online and free. I'm not aware of how they're working with companies in that area. That's a little in another production system, but my understanding is that is a great opportunity that they often do take advantage of in partnerships, because we can have more impact and we can benefit from understanding how we can improve those technologies, make them more cost-effective, and help our students learn how to use them, and extension educators also.
It's been incredibly helpful for farmers because they can look at microclimates and figure out where on their field really needs water and where it doesn't, similarly with micronutrients. I also just had a curiosity question, Mr. Cameron, since I have a tiny bit of time left. Water is so scarce in California. It is also scarce in parts of Washington State, so this is becoming a really common issue. How much attention, because I want to learn from California, how much attention has gone to choosing which crops to grow? Which ones require the least water and create the most food, for example? Has any attention gone to that topic?
Onto which crops use more water or less water?
I'm sure they know the information, but kind of prioritizing how much yield you could get for how little water, and figuring out which ones to grow.
Well, we know almonds made the headlines during our drought, and there have been several studies that have showed that actually deficit irrigation can still produce a very profitable crop, and reduce the water footprint. We know that's the #1 crop in California now with 1.4 million acres and continuing to increase. And I think you'll see more of that as sustainable groundwater management is implemented. The water is going to go to the higher dollar crops. We know that. And those that don't make the cut will be gone. So I think that, when you talk about reducing water, I think California has gone to micro-irrigation for the majority of their crops, unless you have plentiful surface water. There's a big distinction between the two. And I think that's what's driven a lot of the technology in California, the high cost or the unavailability of water, to where we have become extremely efficient in the water usage on the crops we grow. So, but yeah, maybe we can do more.
Thank you. It's super interesting. And we even found out that in Israel, they've found that brackish water makes their watermelons taste better. And so they've been able to use that. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you to all of you.
There has been brackish water being filtered and used in agriculture, and blended.
Thank you. Super interesting.
Thank you all for your testimony and your candor in answering our questions today. What I'm hearing is really remarkable, and I hope others are hearing it too. Farmers are at the forefront of adopting revolutionary new technologies that will enable us to meet our shared goal of food security, while at the same time carefully and strategically managing environmental impacts. I would like to take a moment to put the speed of this remarkable technological march into perspective. If the average age of the U.S. farmer is almost 60 years old, many of our farmers grew up farming with their parents, managing their crops using time-tested tools of intuition and instinct. And many of those men and women farming today with their kids have the ability to generate a multidimensional digital model of their operations. With extensive data on everything from crop health to input use to market intelligence, all while auto-steer drives their tractor with the aid of GPS, and evidently farmers and growers can watch movies while doing so. Perhaps most astounding is that all of this innovation has come in the span of a few decades in a generation, and rivaling the technological advances of any other industry. I hope you all are as proud of this American ingenuity as I am, and as members of this committee are, and I hope when we walk out of this hearing, we will have greater clarity, not just about the conservation benefits of precision ag, but also about what is indeed needed to realize these benefits at scale. We've spoken a lot today about the need for broadband internet and the impact that lack of internet infrastructure has on the ability of farmers and producers to use these incredible technologies. And while the picture that I've described is true for many farmers, those without that access to broadband face financial uncertainty as they are not able to implement the technologies that in many cases they have already paid for. As representatives for our constituents and members of this committee, we have a responsibility to take up the challenge to improve the outcomes, not just on the fields and across ecosystems, but for our rural communities, the communities that are working tirelessly to put the food on the table that we all eat. I thank you all for joining us today, and I give a special thanks to agriculture and conservation expert Dustin Madison, who joined us from Louisa County in Virginia. And with that, I thank you all for your time. I thank you for joining us, and I now close this hearing of the Conservation and Forestry Subcommittee. And under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any question posed by a member. This hearing of the Subcommittee on Conservation and Forestry is now adjourned.